In this video, I'm going to be talking about methods, materials, and strategies you can use to come to read Russian literature in the original with ease and fluency. Before I begin, I would like to give due credit to Professor Alexander Argelies, whose videos here on YouTube and archive post on the How to Learn Any Language forum served as the foundation for my ideas on reading literature in a foreign language. I will link to a video of one of his lectures in the description, which should be regarded as the authority on this topic. Once you've acquired a basic command of a language using a course like Asimil, there are 4 methods that one can use to acquire the ability to read complex literature in a foreign language. They are the dictionary method, bilingual texts, reverse listening, and graded reading. The dictionary method is a rather outdated method that unfortunately is still encouraged by many professors, especially professors of ancient languages. It involves taking a text and looking up every unknown word. The method can be very tedious and progress is often slow. The student spends more time flipping through the dictionary than actually reading the text. Nevertheless, with persistence, this method will eventually work. Online dictionaries and translators can speed up the process, but be aware that many studies have shown that the brain will better retain information found in paper books than on the internet. A good compromise is to use a reader with a glossary. The first book that I read in Russian was George Patrick's Intermediate Russian Reader, which contains a selection of Russian literature and a complete glossary of all the words used. Additionally, and very importantly, all of the accents are marked so that you can always know how to properly pronounce a word. The same author also has an elementary Russian reader, but I haven't used it so I cannot attest to the quality. Another good option is the series of Russian texts put out by Bristol Classical Press. All of these texts have all of the stresses marked, and most of them contain full or nearly full glossaries. After I finished George Patrick's Reader, I got myself a handful of these books and went through them very carefully. I also found audio versions for each of the books, and after reading each chapter carefully, I would listen to the material multiple times. Then, after doing that for each chapter, I went through the entire book as many times as I could, listening and following along in the text. It is very easy to find Russian audiobooks on the internet for free. Do a quick Google search and you should be able to find just about every work of classic Russian literature in recorded form. The second method that you can use to acquire a good reading knowledge of Russian is bilingual texts. You can use this instead of or in conjunction with the dictionary method. You first acquire a number of bilingual texts with faithful translations. You begin by comparing each sentence in the original with the translation. Once you have built up some comfort and speed with this method, you can move from the level of the sentence to the paragraph, the page, the chapter, and the book. Until you are at the most advanced level, it is almost always better to read the translation first, then the original text. So depending on how much you can handle, you read a paragraph, page, or chapter in translation, and then read the same text in the original. The goal should be to increase the amount of text you can handle until you can read the entire book in translation followed by the same book in the original. When you are at the level of chapter or book, you no longer need bilingual text, but you can rather use 2 copies of the same work, one in the original, one in translation. Once you have done this with a number of books, you can begin reading the original without having read the translation first, checking the translation whenever you come across a difficult word or phrase. In this stage, the translation becomes a dictionary keyed to the text you are reading. There are not many great bilingual texts for Russian available in English. I ordered a bunch of them from Amazon and none of them have been great. The best in English are probably the Dover Dual Language series, but the translations of these are sometimes not very faithful. There are much better resources available in German, French, and Italian. I particularly like the Reclam Library and the DTV Zweisprachig books. In Italian, you also have a wealth of material. For example, I have most of the novels of Dostoevsky in bilingual Italian-Russian editions from Bompiani. Search for Testo Russo a Fronte on Amazon.it for a wealth of other editions. It is usually possible to make much faster progress in your reading ability using bilingual texts than using dictionaries, even online dictionaries, because a trained professional has already chosen the most fitting definition for you. When you look up a word in a dictionary, it is often hard for a beginner to know which shade of meaning best fits the text at hand. It also goes without saying that adding audio to bilingual text only enhances the learning process. Treat the audiobook in the same way that you treat a text. Listen to it as many times as necessary until you can understand it at full speed without any help. The third method, which I call reverse listening, is an extension of the use of bilingual texts. Credit for this technique goes entirely to Professor Alexander Argelies, as I have not seen this technique described anywhere else. You must find an audiobook in your native language and a matching text in Russian. You then listen in English and follow along in Russian. This is basically like reading an instantaneous bilingual book, as you must simultaneously match the translation that you hear to the text on the page. You might find this very difficult and mentally exhausting at first, but I encourage you to stick with it for a few hours of practice. You obviously need a decently large vocabulary for this to work, or else you will quickly get lost. I tried and dismissed this technique many times, but I've since found it to be incredibly useful for quickly building reading knowledge. I didn't use this technique for Russian books, but I've since used it productively to bring myself up to reading speed in German and ancient and modern Greek. The final method is graded reading. For this method, you must acquire a large series of text with progressively increasing difficulty. This would mean starting with children's books, moving up through novels for adolescents, then into popular adult literature such as crime or romance novels, then into modern classics, then reverse chronological reading until you get to classic literature. This method of graded reading is very natural, but it presents two large difficulties. First, it can be rather difficult to collect all the material necessary for it to work well, and is often very difficult to judge how difficult a book is. Some children's literature, for example, can be more difficult than novels for adults. Second, for most adults, reading literature for children and adolescents isn't particularly fun or interesting, and therefore it is very easy to lose motivation. There you have it, the only 4 methods I know of that you can use to build fluency in reading literature. Whatever method you use, just keep reading. I personally have noticed that the big benchmarks are 100, 1,000, and 10,000 pages. The first 100 pages you read in any language using whatever method are going to be the most difficult, but after 100 pages, things get a lot easier. Once you hit 1,000 pages, you likely can get rid of all of these methods and just start reading on your own. Once you hit 10,000 pages, you're able to pretty much read anything with ease and speed.